The black delivery guy was laughed at, until they saw his name on the lease. "You don't belong here." The words hit Jamal like a slap, sharp and meant to bruise, spoken by a blond man in a navy suit who didn't even bother to turn his head fully while saying them. He simply pointed at the stack of packages Jamal was holding and added, "Just drop those by the service door, delivery boy." Tenants used the front lobby. For a moment Jamal just stood there, breathing slowly, shoulders heavy from a 12-hour shift, hands pinched from cardboard edges digging into his skin. He could feel eyes on him, the type of eyes that pretend not to stare, but stare anyway, searching for reasons to think less of a man like him. Still, he forced a polite smile and said, "Sir, I'm not in your way. I'm just trying to get to the elevator." The blond man scoffed loudly, as if Jamal's words were comedy. "Elevator? For you? Are you serious?" He turned to the receptionist behind the marble counter. "Why is every random delivery guy walking around like he owns the place? Where's the building manager? Someone should clean this mess up." The receptionist, a young woman named Tara, lowered her eyes, uncomfortable but silent. She had seen this too many times, wealthy tenants talking like they owned air itself. But she said nothing, because that was safer. Jamal exhaled slowly, the kind of breath you take when you are choosing peace even though your whole body remembers a lifetime of insults at school, at stores, at jobs, in elevators where people clutched their bags tighter. He shifted the packages in his arms, holding them closer to his chest like a shield. I'm just trying to deliver these," he murmured. Still calm, still decent, still holding in the fire that tasted like old pain. But the blond man stepped closer, voice rising loud enough to echo across the marble lobby. "No, you're trying to wander around like you own something here. Next time, take the back door. That's where workers go." The words stung more than Jamal wanted to admit, because he had used back doors for most of his life. He had been taught to stay quiet, stay small, stay grateful. But something inside him tightened now, not anger, not pride, something deeper, something tired, something done. Still, he stayed silent, because there was one thing the blond man did not know, one truth hidden under Jamal's quiet, steady breath. He wasn't just carrying boxes, he was carrying the lease. The lease with his name on it. And the moment they saw it, nothing in that building would ever be the same. The blond man didn't back off. Instead, he stepped even closer, close enough that Jamal could smell the expensive cologne dripping off him as he jabbed a finger toward the packages and barked, "If you really think you can use the tenant elevator, then show me proof you're allowed here, because I'm not about to let some random delivery guy roam around the same floor as my family." His voice echoed off the polished floors, bounced against the gold-trimmed walls, and fell heavy in the quiet lobby the way arrogance always did, loud and uninvited, drawing attention from the handful of residents pretending to wait for mail just so they could watch the scene unfold. Jamal felt every stare pressing on his back like weight he had carried since childhood, weight he thought he'd escaped, but seemed to find him everywhere. He swallowed hard, his fingers tightening around the packages, the cardboard edges digging into fresh cuts from the shift before. He wanted to tell the man so many things, that he wasn't some random delivery guy, that he hadn't spent years working double shifts for the fun of it, that he wasn't here by accident, but because life had finally handed him one small piece of justice. But instead, he kept his voice steady, soft but strong as he said, "Sir, please step aside. I don't want trouble." The man laughed a cruel laugh, the type that comes from people who believe the world was built for them alone. "You don't want trouble," he mocked. "Then stop pretending you have business in a place like this." He snapped his fingers at the receptionist. "Call security." Now, Tara froze, torn between doing her job and doing what felt right, her hand hovering over the phone as she whispered, "Sir, maybe we should just let him deliver." "No," the man snapped, cutting her off. "People like him need rules." That line sliced deeper than any insult before, and for the first time Jamal's eyes lifted, not in anger, but in a calm that made Tara's breath catch. Because Jamal wasn't scared. Not today. Not in this building. Not when he held a secret that would flip the whole situation like a storm turning the sky. He took a slow breath, shifted the packages under one arm, and reached into his pocket not quickly, not sharply, just enough to make the blond man stiffen because maybe, just maybe, he thought Jamal was pulling something dangerous. But Jamal was only pulling out a folded paper, old and creased from being read again and again. He held it between two fingers, his voice steady as he whispered, "You want proof I belong here?" The blond man smirked, certain he was about to humiliate Jamal. But that smirk would not survive the next few seconds, because in his hand, Jamal wasn't holding an ID, he was holding the lease, with his name printed across the top in bold ink. For a long moment the lobby froze, like time itself was holding its breath, and the blond man's smirk faded just a little as Jamal calmly unfolded the paper with the slow confidence of someone who finally had the truth on his side. A truth he had kept quiet for weeks because he didn't want attention, didn't want praise, didn't want anything except a chance to build a life his mother once cried about in the dark when she thought her children were asleep. He held out the lease toward the blond man, who let out a scoff and snatched it aggressively, as if he were about to prove Jamal wrong. Prove that someone like him didn't belong in a place with marble floors and chandeliers and a doorman who bowed deeper for certain last names. But the moment his eyes dropped to the top of the page, something changed. His eyebrows twitched, his jaw unclenched awkwardly, his confidence slipped like wet paint sliding down a wall. Tara watched from the desk, her heart pounding, because she saw the color drain from his face as he read the name once, then blinked, then read it again, slower this time. Jamal didn't move. He simply said, in a calm voice that cut the room open like a blade made of quiet truth, "Read the name out loud." And the man's throat tightened, because he couldn't. Not immediately. Not with all the people watching. Not with the security guards stepping into the lobby at that exact moment and pausing, confused, unsure whether to intervene or witness the humiliation building like a storm ready to break. Finally, with a voice suddenly small, the blond man whispered, "Jamal Carter." The lobby gasped as if the walls themselves were shocked. Jamal stepped forward just half an inch, enough to reclaim the space that had been taken from him the moment the man decided his skin tone made him suspicious. "That's me," he said softly. "Apartment to 8B. The corner one." You could have heard a heartbeat from across the room because everyone knew what to 8B was, the luxury corner penthouse that had just been sold for a record price. The one everyone assumed had been purchased by a wealthy tech investor or an international businessman. No one expected a black delivery worker carrying parcels to walk in holding the deed to it. The blond man's lips trembled as he tried to speak, but no words came. Jamal reached out and gently took the lease back from his shaking hand, then stepped toward the elevator. But before the doors closed, he turned his head slowly and said something that made every soul in the lobby freeze. "Next time you talk to someone, make sure you're not insulting your new neighbor." The elevator doors slid shut with a soft metallic whisper, but the silence it left behind was louder than any shout, and Tara, still frozen behind her desk, felt her chest tighten because she realized this wasn't just a moment of embarrassment for the blond man. It was a mirror held up to everyone in that lobby, including herself, and she hated the way her reflection looked in it. She walked toward the man slowly, her heels tapping like guilty echoes on the marble floor. And when she reached him, his face was still pale, his hands still trembling from the shock, and she said in a low voice that felt more like a confession, "Tell them what you told me." He swallowed hard, his throat wobbling like he just tasted regret for the first time. Around them, the lobby staff watched with uneasy eyes, some pretending to straighten papers, others standing too still, like statues learning shame. The blond man shook his head. I didn't know he lived here," he muttered. Tara took a quiet breath, because she had been raised in a neighborhood where people apologized only when they truly meant it, not when they got caught. "That's not what you said," she whispered. He blinked fast, his eyes darting to the floor. "You said he didn't belong here," she continued, her voice steady but burning. "You said the building doesn't allow people like him." Someone in the back gasped. Someone else whispered, "Oh my God." The blond man's jaw tightened with shame so sharp he almost flinched. Security took a cautious step closer, not to defend him, but to quietly witness whatever came next. Tara crossed her arms, her guilt mixing with a sudden fire inside her chest, because she remembered the way Jamal had smiled at her every morning, soft and tired and kind, even when she barely lifted her eyes from her desk. "You humiliated a man carrying boxes," she said softly. "A man doing his job. A man who probably works harder in one day than you have in a year." The blond man clenched his teeth, but there was no anger left, only fear and a sick awareness that he had just mocked the wrong person. Tara turned toward the elevators, her voice trembling but brave. "And you know what hurts the most?" she asked. "He didn't fight you. He didn't shout. He didn't insult you back. He let the truth do it for him." The blond man lifted his head slowly, hearing the weight of those words settle on his shoulders like a punishment he earned with every breath he wasted judging someone he never knew. Before the blond man could answer, the elevator dinged again, and Jamal stepped out slowly, carrying nothing in his hands this time, no boxes, no packages, just the quiet dignity of someone who had spent his whole life swallowing disrespect without letting it poison him. He looked at the gathering crowd, then at Tara, then finally at the man who had mocked him minutes earlier, and his voice was calm, almost too calm, like a storm right before it starts tearing roofs apart. "Do you know why I never said a word?" he asked, his eyes steady, the kind of steady that makes people remember every cruel sentence they ever spoke. The blond man didn't answer. He couldn't, because guilt had wrapped itself around his throat like a rope. Jamal continued, "It's because when you've spent years being treated like you're less, you learn something powerful. You learn that silence is not weakness, it's patience." Tara felt those words hit something deep inside her, something old and rusted and aching, because she remembered her own struggles growing up, her mother working 2 jobs, her father fighting illness, and how she swore she would treat everyone kindly when she finally had a good job, but somewhere along the way she had forgotten that promise. Jamal stepped closer to the blond man, not in anger, not to intimidate, but to force honesty into the uncomfortable space between them. "Do you have any idea," he said softly, "what it feels like to deliver boxes to people who won't even look you in the eye, people who take things from your hands like you're invisible?" The blond man blinked hard, and for the first time, he looked truly human, small, scared, fragile. Jamal nodded slowly. "You don't, and I don't expect you to. But today you're going to see me. Not as the guy carrying packages, not as the guy you laughed at. You're going to see me for who I really am." Tara felt her breath catch, because there was something different in Jamal's voice now, a quiet finality, a truth heavy enough to change the air. "Before I show you what's in that file," Jamal said, tapping the papers under his arm, "I want you to ask yourself something. Why did you think I didn't belong here?" The blond man's face crumpled at that question, because he knew exactly why, and the truth burned hotter than any insult Jamal could have thrown back. The lobby waited, breath held, for the answer. He didn't have the courage to speak. The blond man lowered his eyes, and for a moment the buzzing lights of the lobby seemed too loud, like they were calling out every lie he had ever told himself about being a good person, because now he stood exposed in front of a man he tried to shrink. Jamal stepped closer, not with rage, but with truth shaking in his chest, the kind of truth people spend years burying so deep they forget it's still alive. "Look at me," Jamal said softly, and the blond man lifted his eyes with the trembling obedience of someone standing at the edge of shame. "You didn't just judge me," Jamal continued. "You judged my whole story, my mother, who prayed over every meal even when there wasn't enough. My father, who did double shifts so I could stay in school. My grandmother, who told me to walk with my head high even when the world tried to bend my spine. You judged all of them without knowing a single thing." Tara's throat tightened, because the lobby wasn't just a lobby anymore, it felt like a courtroom, and Jamal was both the witness and the verdict. Jamal looked around at the crowd, his voice steady, but heavy with hurt he had carried for too long. "Every day I walk into buildings where people think being black means being less, where people assume my work defines my worth. But I learned something a long time ago. Your value isn't in what you carry in your hands. It's in what you carry in your heart. Someone in the back whispered, "Wow," and another nodded slowly, their faces shifting from mild curiosity to deep respect. Jamal took the folded lease from under his arm, holding it between his fingers like a truth he had been waiting to drop at the perfect moment. "I never said a word earlier," he said, "because fighting ignorance with anger only feeds it. But fighting it with truth, that changes everything." The blond man swallowed hard, his voice barely a breath. I didn't mean?" "Yes," Jamal cut in gently, "you did. And that's why it matters." Tara felt something like warmth and guilt crashing into each other inside her chest. Jamal unfolded the paper slowly, the sound loud in the silent lobby, crisp edges, clean ink, the kind of document no one could argue with. "Now," he said quietly, "let me show you why today is different." And every eye in the lobby locked on that single piece of paper, waiting for the moment that would turn the entire room upside down. The lobby felt like it stopped breathing. When Jamal finally lifted the lease high enough for everyone to see, the paper catching the lobby light like a quiet explosion, and Tara felt her knees weaken as the truth crawled across her skin. Jamal didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to, because power doesn't shout when it's real. "You asked me who I thought I was," he said, his eyes locked on the blond man who now looked like a child caught stealing. "So let me answer you properly." He turned the lease around, revealing the bold black letters printed across the top, each one slicing through the arrogance floating in the room. Property owner, Jamal A. Harrison. A gasp ripped through the crowd like a wave, hitting everyone. At once mouths opened, hands flew to chests, and even the security guard, who once looked amused, now stood frozen, his face draining of color. Tara covered her mouth as tears gathered at the corners of her eyes, because she knew she had treated him better than the others. But not good enough to feel innocent. The blond man staggered back like the ground beneath him had shifted. "You own this," he whispered, voice cracking like thin ice. Jamal stepped toward him slowly, deliberately, the kind of walk that wasn't meant to intimidate, but to reclaim every inch of dignity that had been stepped on. "Every unit," Jamal said. "Every hallway, every elevator, every floor you laughed on." The blond man shook his head, stuttering. I thought you were just a delivery guy." Jamal finished, his voice calm but sharp with truth. "I used to be. I worked 3 jobs. I carried boxes, made late-night runs, saved every dollar, and when my mother died, I swore no one in my family would struggle again." His voice softened, just a touch. "So I bought this building in her name." Silence pressed down again, heavier this time, thicker with shame and awe. Tara wiped her cheeks, whispering, "Jamal." "I didn't know." Jamal looked at her. Really? Looked at her, and the softness in his eyes made her heart twist. "You didn't treat me like trash," he said, "and that's why I'm not angry with you." Then he turned back to the blond man. "But you remind me why people like me keep fighting." The blond man opened his mouth to speak, but Jamal raised his hand, not harsh, just firm. "Don't apologize yet," he said. "There's one more thing you all need to know before this moment ends." And with that, he slipped a second paper out of his folder, one that made Tara's breath hitch before she even saw what was written on it. The lobby grew so silent, you could hear the hum of the elevator cables as Jamal unfolded the second document, his fingers steady, his breath even, as if he had rehearsed this moment in the quiet corners of his pain 1,000 times. Tara watched, him with her heartbeat thudding in her chest, while the blond man stared in dread, his arrogance collapsing like a building with no foundation. Jamal lifted the paper high enough for all of them to see the bold title stacked across the top. "Notice of Management Review Termination Recommended?" A ripple of surprise spread through the crowd like an electric shock. The blond man stumbled forward, voice trembling. What is that?" he whispered, though the terror in his eyes showed he already feared the answer. Jamal didn't raise his voice. He spoke with the calm certainty of someone who had been hurt enough times to understand that dignity doesn't need volume. "This," he said, tapping the paper gently, is a record of every complaint filed against you, discrimination, harassment, threats, intimidation. He looked him dead in the eyes. And one more that you didn't expect today. From me. The blond man's breath fractured. Jamal, please. Man, I didn't know. You didn't want to know. Jamal corrected, his voice soft but sharp. Because people like me weren't supposed to matter to you. Tara felt another tear slip down her face, because she saw the difference between someone who made a mistake and someone who made cruelty a habit. And Jamal wasn't done. This building, he continued, is more than wood and concrete. It's where my mother worked as a janitor, where she cried in storage closets because tenants treated her like she wasn't human, and I was just a kid carrying delivery bags. Dreaming of a day like this, he stepped closer to the blond man, not to threaten, but to end something that had been broken for a long time. You're dismissed from your position, effective immediately. For a moment, the blond man simply stood there empty, hollow, stripped of the power he had once swung like a weapon. Eventually, he bowed his head, walked toward the door, and disappeared into the cold air outside. Jamal exhaled slowly, the weight of years finally lifting. Tara stepped forward, her voice barely a whisper. Jamal, what do we learn from this? He turned to her, his eyes warm, deep, and painfully honest. That respect, he said, isn't about who has the keys, but who has the heart. And as he walked toward the elevator, the whole lobby understood the truth he carried. Justice isn't always loud. Sometimes, it walks in wearing a delivery jacket and leaves holding the whole building. Moral of the story: never judge a person by the job they do, because you don't know the battles they've fought or the mountains they've climbed. Power is temporary, but character lasts forever.